Good morning. It's Friday, January 31st, 2020 in Altoona, Iowa. If I look a little blurry-eyed this morning, it's because I attended a Trump rally for 7+ hours yesterday. It was an interesting experience, and since I know that viewers of my channel really don't want to hear what Donald Trump has to say, I'm going to focus on the mechanics of the rally, the style of the rally, and what the overall experience was like. First, the timing involved. Parking did not turn out to be the problem I thought it would. Doors were to open at 3 with Trump speaking at 7. And I got to the Drake University neighborhood about 1:30. Turns out students and maybe faculty park in the nearby neighborhoods, and when their classes are over, they go to their car and leave. And I found a spot on a side street, perhaps 4 blocks from the theater. It was then 1:30. I sat in my car until 2 o'clock, staying warm, listening to an audio book. At 2 o'clock, I walked the half a mile plus to the venue. I then got in a long line that was very well managed. You would have thought you were at Disney World. And I spent more or less the next hour going up and down, back and forth, working towards the 2 entrances to the theater. I believe the venue was open when I first arrived at perhaps 2:15, and if so, that was very wise. Even with the venue open 45 minutes early, again, it took me an hour to get to the Secret Service screening. They were very strict about what could get in, and as you got closer to the entrance, you would see piles of cigarette lighters, water bottles, things that you simply couldn't take in. I predicted in my video yesterday that I wouldn't be able to take my GoPro tripod in, which is only about 1 foot long, but that I thought I would be able to take the little tripod for the Sony vlogging camera in. That was inspected out in the line, but when I got to the actual metal screening, and they said, "This is a tripod," I said, "No, it's a handle." Well, the Secret Service wins its arguments. They treated it as a tripod. They offered me the chance to go back to my car to save it, and I said, "Do I have to go through that hour-long line again?" And they said, "No, we'll let you come right to the front." But it would have been a 15-minute walk each way, and it's a $20 tripod. In the end, I asked them to just put it over by the side of the building, and they said, "We can't guarantee it'll be there." And I said, "I'm not asking you to, because you're going to throw it out anyway, so any chance is better than none." And sure enough, when many hours later, the theater was being emptied, I went up to the front where all traces of the metal detector and whatnot had been removed, and my tripod was lying there. Iowa is an honest place. Doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. I wasn't surprised it was there, so no harm, no foul. When I got in, still, well, it's now maybe 3:15, maybe 3:30. I saw some isolated seats in the very best section, so I walked down some rows, and the very first row I picked, I asked if they had a single seat, and they did. And so I was between 2 women. One woman was maybe 50. She had her 30-year-old son with her. The other woman was my age, and she had a college classmate with her. And I found a seat with a good view. We were still 3.5 hours from when Donald Trump was scheduled to speak. Most people spent that time standing in concession lines, which were extraordinarily long. On the other hand, we had nothing else to do, so you would see people coming back with caramel corn, popcorn, pieces of pizza, whatever. You can see from the footage that a very high percentage of the people in attendance had on Trump clothing. There were a lot of Trump hats, there were a lot of Trump wool hats, there were a lot of Trump t-shirts, there were some quasi-obscene Trump t-shirts. Not disrespectful of Trump, I don't think those would have been permitted. I was dressed as I am now, and when I was outside in line, I had on a wool ski cap from my daughter's ski resort. No one was unfriendly, and even the Trump people who were fully decked out in Trump clothing didn't particularly talk to each other. There was not a negative vibe. I was also surprised. Again, I had people on either side of me, and the seating was uncomfortable. If it had been an airline, this would have been the most uncomfortable airline seat that I'd ever been in. And frankly, the amount of time I spent in it, I could have flown from Seattle to Hawaii. One of the problems about being stuck there was, just like on an airplane, you might have to get up and go to the restroom. Once I needed to when I first got there, and once I went for prevention, and on that one, the line was very long. We're talking 15 minutes. I was shocked at the number of TV cameras. It more than doubled what I had ever seen at a Democratic rally or speech. It was as if we were in the big leagues and everything else around here in Iowa has been the minor leagues. I'm used to having all 4 national networks there. Sometimes CNN comes along, that's 5. Often the campaign for the candidate involved is there, that's 6. I think you could stop and count the TV cameras and you would be in the neighborhood of 25 to 30. Who they all are or who they all were, I have no idea. In terms of overall approach and style, I guess this was more like a rock concert than anything else. For me, what was important is that people stood up. I was already without a tripod, and even though I had a good view of the speakers, holding a camera from that distance probably isn't going to yield a good result for the viewer. When people are standing up, it's nigh on impossible. I'll tell you what the program was. First of all, it started at 5 o'clock, and interestingly, the venue was full by 5 o'clock. Trump wasn't scheduled to speak for another 2 hours, but they stopped letting people in. The event started with a prayer. I've been to several dozen Democratic speeches in my 4 months here in Iowa, and I have never seen an event started with a prayer. It was quite a prayer, too. Mostly it thanked God for giving us all Donald Trump. I've never heard a prayer like that. It was followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. The only Democrat I've encountered who starts his speeches with the Pledge of Allegiance is Vice President Joe Biden. And he always starts his appearances with the Pledge of Allegiance. So that was not unusual to me. Then there was a song, specifically the Star-Spangled Banner. Marianne Williamson starts her appearances with a song. She always uses the same singer, and I considered that singer to be spectacular. The Star-Spangled Banner was sung at the Trump rally by a woman with a sensational voice.
Say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
So, after the prayer, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the singing of the national anthem, the first speaker was the Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives in the Iowa legislature. He was a good speaker. Several times he said, I'm going to skip over this because the Republican chairman covers this. And the second speaker was the chairman of the Republican Party in Iowa. Although he looked like an accountant who should have an eye shade on, he was the best speaker of the night. And he gave a stem winder of a speech. It was about 15 minutes long. So from 5 to 5:30, we had 2 entertaining speakers. And they were greeted with uproarious audience responses, and they hit typical Republican talking points and always got loud cheers and chants. From 5:30 until perhaps 10 minutes of 6, nothing happened. That's when I made my preventative bathroom break. A speaker started while that was going on, and I never did learn who it was. I think he was a campaign functionary, possibly the chairman of the Trump campaign. He was not a particularly good speaker. When he finished, he said the vice president would be on in 20 minutes. I think it was more like 30 minutes, but Around 6:20, Vice President Pence spoke. Now, I don't know about you, but I've always considered Vice President Pence to be basically a robot. Imagine my surprise then when he gave an excellent political speech. I don't know if it was scripted for him or he came up with it on his own, but his speech hit all of the major talking points, struck a very responsive chord with the audience, got loud cheers and loud chants. And of course, he referred to prayer and God and whatnot. Anyway, I was really surprised. Pence's speech was excellent. It was very obsequious, but it is what it is. The vice president then stopped at about 10 minutes of 7. I should add that at least for Vice President Pence, the audience was on its feet for the entire speech. And as Pence spoke, I timed it and I turned my clock off after 23 minutes, which might have been a minute or two late. So let's give Pence a 20-minute speech. And the audience stood for the entire speech. They were so eager to hear President Trump that they remained standing. This was not something I wanted to do, and I sat down. And sure enough, President Trump did not appear at 7 o'clock, and a few people did in fact sit down. About 7:05 to 7:10, President Trump came out. One of the things you can see, but it really needs to be explained, is the long runway towards the speaker's podium. I felt like I was at a Miss World contest. The most remote person, the man who led the Pledge of Allegiance, probably spent more time walking up the boardwalk to the speaker's podium than he did leading the Pledge of Allegiance. When President Trump came out, the purpose of that long boardwalk became clear to me, because he acted like a movie star or a celebrity, blowing kisses and waving to the crowd. The enthusiasm of the crowd was genuine, and you could tell that Trump was enjoying it enormously. I'll play you perhaps the first 15 or 20 seconds of his speech.
I worked so hard for this state. You just got two of the greatest trade deals.
Perhaps a normal politician would say, "Hello, Iowa. Thank you for coming out. It's a pleasure to be here." You can check my veracity, but I think his first words were, "I have done such a great job for Iowa." And I'm not going to go any further than that, because you're not watching this video to hear Donald Trump speak. If Trump started at 7:10, I think most of the audience expected him to be finished at about a Pence-length speech, or 20 minutes. So he would be done at 7:30. I stood for a long time, finally saw one or two people around me sit down, and after some amount of time, 20 or 30 minutes, I just needed to sit down, so I did. 7:30 came and went, that's the 20-minute mark, and Trump continued. Then we passed the 30-minute mark. Then we passed the 40-minute mark. People started to sit down. Then we passed the 50-minute mark. So it's 8 o'clock. At about this point, the woman next to me with her 30-year-old son got up and left. I don't know why he was speaking. It wasn't appropriate for me to ask her what was up, but she left. By now, everyone is sitting down. Then we passed the 1 hour mark. Then the hour 10-minute mark. More people are leaving. So many people were leaving that I started filming them leaving. Some of the people with the most bold, obnoxious Trump t-shirts on left. Now, I'm not assuming these people are disgruntled or angry. I think they'll still vote for Trump, but they were leaving. I'm not sure Trump realized that most of his audience had been in line since 2 o'clock, perhaps earlier. So they'd been there for 5 hours before he started speaking. We passed the 80-minute mark. At one point, he made a religious comment. I think it was about abortion, and that got a standing ovation, and some people sat down again immediately. Then a little later, some people sat down again some more, and then I don't know, 5 or 10% of the audience remained standing. On the other hand, more and more people were leaving. Finally, after 90 minutes, President Trump wrapped it up. I could give you some commentary on why he spoke so long. It would be along the lines of, here he is on trial in the Senate as a result of his impeachment, and he needed the salve of an adoring audience. But he just went on and on and on. And when he finally finished, after 90 minutes, he did not exit quickly. He worked his way back down this long boardwalk. Meanwhile, people are heading for the exits. They're not paying attention to the fact that Trump is still visible, and people left. It took a long time to get out of the venue. I retrieved my tripod successfully. I had a 4-block walk. It was a sketchy neighborhood, but there were so many people around that I don't see how anything could have happened. And when I got back to my car, it was 9 o'clock. It had been 7 hours since I left my car, 7.5 hours since I parked. What did Trump say about the Democrats? Well, it was interesting because his primary target was Hillary Clinton. You could see him hoping for the good old days, and he replayed the 2016 campaign and his highlights against Hillary Clinton. I read in the paper that Trump has not been back to Iowa since the 2016 caucuses. Perhaps that explains some of it. He referred to Bernie as a radical socialist. Joe Biden was always called Sleepy Joe. He referred to Sleepy Joe starting a speech in Iowa saying, "Good to be here in Ohio." And according to Trump, even if you're Winston Churchill, when you start a speech with a gaffe that bad, there's no recovery. He mentioned Pete Buttigieg. He called him Pete Butt Edge Edge. Boot Edge Edge. Pete Boot Edge Edge. His comment was, they call him Mayor Pete because nobody can pronounce his last name. And he said some derogatory comments about South Bend, Indiana, but it was very brief. Elizabeth Warren was simply Pocahontas. And she got more attention from the state GOP chairman than she did from Trump. I'm not sure Trump even mentioned Elizabeth Warren. No, he did, and he put her in the same boat as Bernie, a radical socialist. There was no mention of Amy Klobuchar. There was no mention of Tom Steyer. There was no mention of Andrew Yang. Trump and Pence and the other speakers, but mostly Trump, because he spoke 90 minutes, far more than the other speakers combined, referred to the indignity of having all these liberal socialist Democrats around Iowa all this time. One or more speakers dissed the Des Moines Register, which got a big audience response, and Trump repeatedly, half a dozen times or more, dissed the national press. And that always got a rise from the audience. A point that needs to be made is that Trump is here because the Iowa caucuses are next Monday. His campaign does not want to run the risk of a protest vote for the other Republicans running in Iowa. However, all of the speakers, the GOP House leader, the GOP party chairman, Vice President Pence, and even Donald Trump said, please caucus next Monday and then vote for me in November. But the word caucus was used over and over, and there was a real effort made to get the audience members to show up on Monday at a Republican caucus to support President Trump. I hope you enjoy the video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe. Thanks for watching.